Hi, in today's video English lesson, you're going to learn the three elements of reported speech and the difference between say and tell. Now, reported speech is basically the situation where you have a conversation with one person, and then we're going to report that conversation to someone else. Now, what makes it difficult is the fact that when we're reporting speech, there's a perspective shift. There's also a time shift, passage of time. And in some cases, may even be a location shift. Now, we're going to look at this in the form of a story that I've created for this lesson. We'll watch that video and then we'll study it for the different elements of reported speech. See you after the presentation. Tom has decided to take up golf as his new hobby. He's in business and he knows that golf is a great way to connect with his clients on a more personal level. So he goes into the sporting goods store and asks the sales assistant to recommend him a set of clubs. They talked for a bit, and the sales assistant did indeed recommend Tom a set of golf clubs. In the end, Tom bought the clubs, and now he's ready to hit the golf course. Tom relayed to me his story. While the story is playing, I want you to pay special attention to the dialog boxes as I relay the story. The dialog boxes will be in direct speech, while I will be telling the story in reported speech. Afterwards, we'll compare the differences. Tom told the sales assistant that he was a total beginner and that he needed a set of clubs to get started. The sales assistant said that the most difficult thing for beginners was to get the ball up in the air. He also said it was a good idea to get a beginner set. He told Tom that when he got better at golf, he could upgrade to a more advanced set of clubs. The sales assistant said that the recommended clubs were lightweight and easy to swing. He also said they had markings on them that would show Tom how to hold them properly. Finally, he told Tom that they didn't come with a bag, and if he wanted one, it would cost extra. Now, together, we're going to analyze the story of Tom at the sporting goods store. There are two things we want to unpack here. Number one, we're going to learn how to turn direct speech into reported speech. And number two, we're going to understand the differences in how to use say and tell when reporting speech. Let's head over to the board. When reporting someone's speech, it is important that we clearly indicate who said what and make it clear for the listener. Therefore, there are a few things that we have to do to make everything clear and understood. Number one, we need to add a reporting clause. Number two, the perspective of the dialogue often changes. Therefore, we also need to change some pronouns, references to times, and references to location. And lastly, when reporting speech, we typically push the verb tense back to the past or future in the past from what was used in direct speech. We call this a backshift. Allow me to explain these three concepts, and I will also demonstrate with some examples from the lead story. Reporting clauses include reporting verbs. And the two basic reporting verbs you absolutely have to know are say and tell. And we'll get into the differences in just a moment. Reporting verbs tell us who said what. And the more advanced reporting verbs also report on number one, the situation, and number two, the intended meaning of the speaker. Here is a graphic I've created for you and have included in your free study guide as a thank you for watching. You can find a link to that down below in the video description. Now, let's just take a step back and say what a clause actually is. A clause is basically a sentence fragment that has a subject and a verb. That clause is linked to another clause to form a sentence. With reported speech, we need to indicate the speaker. For the subject, we'll use the speaker's names, and as the reporting evolves, we might switch to using pronouns instead once it's clear who's speaking. And then we separate with that. However, this is mostly optional. Now, let's get into the differences between say and tell. You really can tell the difference between the two just by how they are constructed. I'll bring in two examples, we'll contrast them, and you'll see the difference. He said he wanted a new set of clubs. He told the assistant he wanted a new set of clubs. Let's isolate all that's the same from the two examples and see what's left. Now you can see it. The object exists after tell, but it is absent after say. We don't add an object after say because it isn't directed at any one specific. We simply say something in general. Tell is directed at someone or a group of people. When we're speaking personally, tell is used to give instructions or advice. We can also use tell to add weight to what was being said. It's much more direct, it's much more personal, and it's much more instructive. Next up, we'll get into the perspective shifts. In a related situation, Amy is talking to Leah about her client, Tom. Tom had told her before that he was taking up golf. Now, Amy doesn't play golf, but one of her colleagues does. She proposes to Leah, her boss, that John should take Tom out for a game of golf one of these days. He, Tom, loved the idea, so Amy said she would get back to him by Wednesday, in 2 days' time. Leah is going to tell John about the situation and report Amy's proposal. A day later, Leah calls John into her office to see if he's interested in playing golf with Tom. John, Amy said that her client was going to take up golf. She said that she doesn't mind if you took her client out for a game of golf. He loved the idea, so she told him she'd get back to him tomorrow. So, what do you think? In the two dialogues, there are perspective shifts of both person and location. Let's bring back those sentences and highlight the shifts. As we can see from the first conversation, Tom told me he was taking up golf. He refers to Tom from an earlier conversation. I suggested he, Tom, could try it out with John, one of her colleagues. He loved the idea, so I said I'd get back to him by Wednesday. As of today's conversation with Leah, it's Monday and Wednesday is 2 days away. Let's bring in the second conversation now. So now, Leah calls John into the office and asks if he would play a game of golf with Tom. John, Amy told me her client was taking up golf. Me refers to Leah in her conversation with Amy, her. She said she, so both she's referred to Amy. Doesn't mind if you took him out for golf. So now John shifts to second person. he said he loved the idea, so he refers to Tom in both cases. And he's always been talked about between Leah and Amy and between John and Amy. He always stays third person. She said she, again, she and she refer both to Amy. She said she would get back to him by tomorrow. So Wednesday shifted to tomorrow. Now, hopefully you were able to keep track of all the different shifts and pronouns. I know pronouns can be a difficult thing in English, and it's especially important when we're doing reported speech. Now, let me just bring up a table that shows the most common perspective shifts. When we do reported speech, we shift subject pronouns, object pronouns, possessive pronouns, possessive adjectives, expressions of time, and mentions of location. I'll just do a quick review of some of these shifts to give you a better idea of how it works. So just a quick rundown of the subject pronouns: I, you, he, she, it, we, you, and they. Generally, the second person is the one that shifts. You often becomes he and she, or in the plural, they. And now object pronouns. So object pronouns come after the verb. So now we're looking at me, you, him, her, it, us, you, and them. And typically, again, the second person is the one that usually shifts. You goes to him or her, or in the plural, you becomes them. And now we have possessive pronouns. Possessive pronouns are often sentence finishers. So these would be mine, yours, his, hers, its, ours, yours, theirs. Again, second person usually is the one that shifts. His and hers, in the plural, yours to theirs. And now we have possessive adjectives. These possessive adjectives will precede a noun. And as you can see, the second person are the ones that usually shift. His and her, your to their. Now we get to time expressions. So here you can see today, tomorrow, yesterday, next week, next month, next year, last week, last month, last year. Today often shifts in time, and these time shifts depends on how much time passes in between the reporting. So today could be yesterday, or that day, or several days ago. Tomorrow could be today, or yesterday, or sometime farther in the past. Yesterday could be some days ago, or that day. Next week, next month, next year, this can be the following week, the following month, the following year. And last week, last month, last year could be the week, the month, or the year before. And finally, we have demonstrative pronouns and verbs of location. Demonstrative pronouns show us where things are. For example, this and that. So in reported speech, this often shifts to that. Here and there. Come shifts to go, and bring shifts to take, and vice versa. Go can shift to come, and take can shift to bring. So it really depends on the perspective of who's speaking and the location the person is bringing the thing to. So that does it for perspective shifts. Next up, we'll do the verb back shifts, and then we'll bring it to a close. The idea of a verb back shift is the third element of reported speech. It helps us to put what's being reported into a time perspective. At whatever the time of speaking was, the time of direct speech, that was in the past. At the time of us reporting what's been said, it's now the present. So we talk about that situation by pushing the verb tenses that had been used into a further position in the past. This goes for most tenses and language structures, but not all. I'll just quickly run through which tenses go through this back shift. Here you can see we'll be looking at present tenses, past tenses, modal verbs and the future, imperatives, and questions. I'll also introduce more examples related to the original lead story and show some of the verb tense backshifts. I'll also point out other elements of reported speech, and we'll treat this as a general review. Let's start with the present tenses. Here we can see present simple goes to past simple, present continuous goes to past continuous, present perfect goes to past perfect, present perfect continuous goes to past perfect continuous. The first example comes from our original lead story. In the direct speech, I need goes to he needed, past simple. In the second example, I'm taking lessons now, goes to he said he was taking lessons at the time. At the time, now, you can see those are time shifts. In the present perfect example, I've tried golfing a few times. Goes now to he said that he had tried golfing a few times. Present perfect continuous example, I've been improving my swing. He said that he'd been improving his golf swing. So simply just a backshift to the past perfect continuous. Now let's look at past tenses. Notice here only 2 of the tenses shift backwards instead of 4. Generally in English there are 4 tenses in each time zone. So the present tenses have 4, the past tenses have 4, and the future tenses have 4. But the past perfect and the past perfect continuous don't need time shifts. So only the past simple goes back to the past perfect, and the past continuous goes back to past perfect continuous. In our past simple example, I played last week with John. He said that he had played with John the week before. In the past continuous example, I was doing well compared to last time until the 6th hole. He said that he had been doing well compared to the time before until the 6th hole. Again, not only did we shift the verb tense backwards from past continuous to past perfect continuous, but we also shifted the time expression from last time to the time before. Now let's get into modal verbs. Will is the number 1 modal verb, and it stands for the future. So when we backshift will, we are using the future in the past. So will goes to would. Other modal forms can also be shifted to their past forms. So must, which doesn't have a past, so we use the alternative, have to. Have to goes to had to. Can goes to could, or its alternative, was able to. Shall goes to should, and may goes to might. In the will example, you will start to get better after a few months of practice. The instructor told Tom he would start to get better after a few months of practice. The must example, you must practice every week. He told Tom he had to practice every week. The can example, you can buy a practice net to work on your swing at home. He said Tom could buy a practice net to work on the swing at home. Shall we often use in questions in the first person. Shall we book an appointment for next Friday? Notice the reported speech will use a reporting verb. Instead of tell or say, we use asked. He asked Tom if they should book an appointment for the following Friday. Shall, should. May, might. We may have to take a rain check because of the weather. The instructor warned that they might have to take a rain check because of the weather. A couple of things here. The instructor warned. So here we saw another reporting verb, warned instead of say or tell. And another thing I want to point out is a rain check, which is an expression that means to postpone or delay. And this expression comes from golf, but we often use it in English conversation. So let's say you have a date or a meeting, and for whatever reason you have to cancel. you might say, can we do a rain check? And now we'll look at the imperatives. Imperatives are when we give instructions. And when we report the imperative, we change it into the infinitive. So here we can see Tom with his instructor giving him a set of instructions. The instructor told him to set his feet, grip the club, and hit through the ball. So we can say that the instructor told Tom to set his feet. Grip the club, he instructed Tom to grip the club. Hit through the ball, he advised Tom to hit through the ball. Notice with the imperative to infinitive, oftentimes it's better to use reporting verbs. So you can refer back to that graphic to get a list of the reporting verbs in the video description down below. And the last thing we'll look at are questions. First, we'll see an example of a yes-no question. Yes-no questions generally start with an auxiliary verb or a modal verb of some kind. In our case, do you want to try my pro golf clubs now? When we report a yes-no question, instead of using the auxiliary verb, we switch it into an if clause. If replaces the auxiliary verb. So do goes to if, and if goes as the link between the reporting clause. The instructor asked Tom if he wanted to try his pro clubs. With regular questions, we often invert the auxiliary verb, then the subject, and the main verb. But with the reported question, there is no inversion. So after if, it's just a statement. We need a subject, he. We need the verb, wanted, to try, and then the object, his pro clubs. WH questions, we also report them with a relative clause. So instead of an if statement, we keep the WH question word like who, what, when, where, how, why, and we just treat it as a relative clause. So Tom asked the golf instructor, that's our reporting clause, what he should work on, not what should I work on, where we use the inversion. Here, after what, no inversion. What he, subject, should work as the verb form on for the next lesson as the object of those verbs. Right, and that does it for reported speech. We sure learned a lot in that video just now. You learned all about reporting clauses and how to form them properly with say and tell. We also learned how to transform the pronouns and time expressions when we turn direct speech into reported speech. And then we revised how the verb tenses shift backwards to the past when we use reported speech. So if you found this video helpful for your English learning needs, why don't you hit that like button and also subscribe to my channel so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Additionally, for your English learners out there, I've got a Facebook group called Graphic English. You can join me there, and I post regular images, photos, diagrams, basically content to help you learn English grammar and vocabulary with visual graphics. So if you're a visual learner, you'll definitely want to check that out. And you can find a link to that down in the description below. And one last thing, I've put together a blog post and a study guide, so you can go there and you can read this exact presentation, and the study guide will give you some diagrams to help you remember the key learning points from today's video English lesson. So that's it for today, and I'll see you next time.